Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Aisha Subarkash. Israel has acted on its threat to retaliate against Iran for last week's unprecedented attacks, which included more than 300 drones and missiles. Israeli officials confirmed to U.S. media that it had carried out the strikes to show it had the ability to hit targets inside Iran. How are Tehran's neighbors reacting to this latest crisis, and how close are we to a wider regional war? Senior Iranian officials reported early morning blasts on Friday at a military base near the city of Isfahan. The scale of the damage was unclear, but early reports suggested the strikes were carried out by small drones. Last week, Iran launched a barrage of drones and missiles at Israel. This was in response to an attack on its consulate in Syria on April 1st. Iran's immediate neighbors in the Gulf and Central Asia have called for restraint. Earlier this week, the foreign ministers of 5 Central Asian countries and the GCC met in Uzbekistan's capital, Tashkent, to forge more cooperation and to address growing regional threats. How will these two regions be affected by this latest crisis, and are their interests in line? And for more on the effect of this latest crisis on Central Asia and the Gulf, joining me now from Geneva is Tarek Farhadi. He is the former advisor to the IMF and World Bank. And from Abu Dhabi, Suha Çubukçuoğlu, a senior fellow at Trends Research. Gentlemen, welcome to Straight Talk. It's good to have you on the program. So, Suha, in less than a week, we have seen Israel respond. Where is this crisis headed between Iran and Israel?
But I think there is no escalation inside. I think the two sides traded, measured, calculated responses to each other's attacks. And I think we're at that peak point or an inflection point where I think we're going to see hostilities and tensions de-escalate at this stage, because neither side wants to see an all-out regional war, nor to involve, their partners or proxies or, for that matter, trade relationships affected in a way that goes beyond their control. I think this is pretty much what we will going to see. Part of the reason is that, Gulf countries, they are calling for maximum self-restraint to spare the region from dangers of war and its dire consequences. They're kind of in this precarious situation between Israel and Iran.
Yes.
Of course, they see a risk in escalation in conflict and the potential, spillover effects on countries. So both sides are, I think, under a lot of pressure, both from U.S. great powers like U.S., China, and Russia, but also from regional players like the GCC countries.
So, Tarek, following the Iranian attacks on Israel last week, Tehran said its strikes on Israel had ended, but they would resume if it were attacked. Does this count, or as Suha mentioned, is Iran trying to de-escalate this tension?
I think the ability of Iran to strike further into Israel is limited, because last week it was demonstrated that the airspace of other countries was utilized by allies of Israel to defend Israel. So Iran is not dealing only with Israel, but with a coalition of countries that defend Israel. And at this point, I think Iran doesn't have the capability to do more, other than losing face, because then Israel would retaliate, and this wouldn't be good for the regime inside. And also the United States is discouraging Israel into pushing further into these Iran attacks, because that would mean that oil prices could jump 10 to 15% and reignite inflation, while the Federal Reserve and the European Central Bank have been trying to fight inflation, and even for Joe Biden's election purposes. If inflation reignites in the United States, the majority of the people in the United States are not looking into foreign policy, but
yes.
they are looking into prices.
So, Suha, meanwhile, earlier this week, foreign ministers of 5 Central Asian countries and the Gulf Cooperation Council met in Uzbekistan, and this is the second meeting of its kind that followed last year's Jeddah summit. Could you talk to us about this meeting's importance, especially at a time of heightened tensions in the Middle East?
Yeah, the meeting signifies a growing relationship between the GCC and Central Asia with the potential for increased cooperation on various fronts. I mean, the meeting itself aimed to solidify collaboration between the two sides, involving economic partnerships like cultural exchange and joint efforts on issues like security and counterterrorism, which is also mentioned in the joint statement released on 15th of April. There are several other points like building on the progress of the previous round, which was held in September 2022, and commitment from both sides to maintain dialogue and build upon any agreements. And also potential for new initiatives, interregional connectivity and cooperation, such as railroad links or port connectivity. And one of the reasons is that when it comes to cooperation with the GCC, Central Asia depends on external actors for foreign trade because it's a landlocked region, as we know. Currently, for instance, only 1% of Central Asia's trade goes through, among the GCC countries, the UAE specifically. But when you look at the overall size of the economic engagement, it's significant.
Yes.
The focus especially is on like renewable energy, tourism, sustainable economy, creating new jobs, and for instance, bilateral relations in that respect count actually more than the multilateral engagements.
Yes.
So this is a significant step to turn these bilateral relationships into a multilateral format, and increase cultural diplomacy, understanding, and also turn this into a kind of an economic diversification plan, where both regions look toward each other as viable partners.
So Tariq, during the Tashkent meeting, both sides pushed efforts to build the Trans-Afghan Railway project. What kind of a project is this, and is this, for example, a viable one?
Yes, in the background of all of this, the net beneficiary of investments and infrastructure investments in Central Asia is China. China is the major actor, economic actor of this neighborhood. And through investments by the Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries, in Uzbekistan, in Central Asia in general, China will benefit from a region which has better connectivity. And China wants to get to the Persian Gulf, of course. It wasn't possible before because the Americans were present in Afghanistan, but now there is a void that China will fill. And China also is the country that put Saudi Arabia and Iran next to a table for them to make peace. So the Afghanistan portion is small, but there is a road that's being developed in Wakhan, which is the Pamir region of Afghanistan in northeastern Afghanistan. Afghanistan has an 80 kilometers border with China. And then through the north of Afghanistan, the railway, which would benefit Uzbekistan, it would benefit Iran. It's all about the connectivity. Investors will be there to invest as long as security remains at least at this level.
So what do you think? I mean, what would strengthen Eurasian connectivity mean for the Russian, Chinese, and Iranian influence in the region?
I think strengthened connectivity would provide, first of all, empower Central Asian states. It would provide them with more options for trade and investment. They can lessen their reliance on a single power, which in some cases, in terms of security, it's Russia, and in economic terms, it's China. I mean, that's kind of the mantra, isn't it? And so increasing competition among regional powers will likely, strengthen the hand of Central Asian states, where all these parties, Iran, China, Russia, and also Turkey, will compete for influence, potentially leading to better deals for Central Asian countries and create new opportunities. New infrastructure projects, trade routes, but also, better planning and management to avoid creating new dependencies. I think the success of this diversification effort will depend on the ability to navigate these competing push and pull relationships and security challenges, and how each viable partner presents itself as an attractive partner to other countries.
So, Tarek, talk to us about some challenges. I mean, how are both Gulf and Central Asian countries addressing Afghanistan? I mean, what's the shape of their relations? Because we know that the Taliban regime is constructing the Kosh Tepe irrigation canal, which upended many Central Asian nations.
Yes, the Koshep irrigation canal has created discomfort in Uzbekistan, of course. All of these countries are dealing with Taliban because they want to keep a watch on how the situation in Afghanistan is going to develop. They are worried about potential terrorism groups developing in Afghanistan. We saw the Moscow attacks also, but none of these countries are willing to recognize a country that does not have constitution, for instance. So it is not conceivable for any of these countries to invest in projects inside Afghanistan because there's no constitution. The Taliban don't have a constitution.
Yes.
They have closed the schools, and nobody wants to really be seen in an official picture next to the Taliban at this point.
So a very quick answer, please. So you mentioned diversification and more cooperation between the GCC and Central Asian nations. So are we likely to see more rivalry among other major players of the region, I mean, including with Turkey, the United States, and the European Union?
Yes, certainly, because Central Asia is kind of a transit corridor between all these surrounding powers, the periphery, and itself trying to emerge as an agency, as a central region on its own. So that creates these different push and pull effects where parties, concentrate on their own interests to get the maximum out of the scene. So there are, limits to their influence, competing interests, and security concerns. But Turkey has an advantage here, which is soft power leverage because of its cultural and linguistic ties with some Central Asian countries that can be leveraged to build stronger relationships. And the economic side of it, of course, trade partnerships, especially through the organization of the Turkic states.
Yes.
It also touches on the cultural aspect of it, as I mentioned, the education, language, creating common reference points. And also Central Asian states, from their perspective, Turkey is a viable balancer against competing influences, like say from Iran, and helps in their effort to diversify these partnerships. And they welcome Turkey's involvement as a way to counterbalance other powers.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.